Hey everyone and welcome back to a new video. I don't know about you, but it's hard to say that Games Workshop hasn't been on point with a lot of its recent online preview events, not only making sure that both core games get an equal amount of attention, but almost succeeding in having both communities get excited for one another's releases. And I think that's been rather well encapsulated with the recent reveal of Sigvald the Magnificent, or Age of Sigmar Fulgrim for those of you looking with a 40k lens. And in today's video I want to have a bit of a closer look at this new model and analyse some of the really interesting features that pop out to me. But before I do that, a quick recap for those of you who aren't familiar with Sigvald. He's one of the classic champions of chaos from the era of Warhammer Fantasy, and is a bit of a fan favourite for the rather audacious persona that we all saw in his reveal video. As a servant of Slaanesh, he loves to indulge himself in all of life's dark pleasures and depravities and despises anything that he considers ugly or crude. Unsurprisingly, he also considers himself the pinnacle of beauty and excellence, and even once launched a campaign against the High Elves of Ulthuan because he felt aggrieved that they were renowned for having more fulsome and golden hair than he did. And that vanity bled into those who followed him. His personal retinue would carry mirrored shields so that he could gaze upon himself in the heat of battle, and it was said that he would even stop fighting altogether to bask in his own reflection while murmuring compliments to himself. And yet, like all champions of chaos it seems, he also met with a rather humorous end. During the end times, Sigvald's face was horribly scarred in a duel with one of Nagash's most trusted Mortarchs, Krell, and in his fury, Sigvald tore into Krell until the undead lieutenant lay broken at his feet. However, in his rage, Sigvald didn't quite notice his supposed ally, Troll King Throg, approaching from behind, and who then proceeded to pulp Sigvald into a rather squishy lump of meat before relieving himself on what was left. Those of you who also remember what happened to Archaon at the hands of Grimgor Ironhide during the end times might just see a pattern forming. But regardless of his past, Sigvald has now made his way into the mortal realms and is beginning to unite the forces of Slaanesh in the wake of the Chaos God's coming apotheosis, which we've already begun to see in the Broken Realms supplements. And it's that sense of a grand return that I want to focus on as we start to look at the model itself, because that really is emphasised in Sigvald's pose. The arms are outstretched, not only suggesting how relaxed he is, but also opening himself up figuratively to his opponents, and far more so than his prior embodiment. He's clearly letting them drink in his appearance, revealing his full body and the gorgeous splendour of his armour. Even his hair and cloak are parting to ensure that no part of him is obscured from sight, lest the enemy not realise the perfection that stands confidently before them. And that perhaps becomes a bit clearer when we hold Sigvald up against a model like Lionel Johnson. Putting the Fulgrim connotations aside, you can see what I mean by how confident Sigvald's pose is, and how his narcissism and vanity rise to the surface, just as the lion's ferocity does with his pose. What's clear the moment you see this model is that Sigvald wants to be seen by everyone and commands their attention visually before anything else. And while I certainly would not question that Sigvald is a stupendously beautiful individual, there are two subtle features that suggest to me at least that he is perhaps not as confident as we might at first think. Firstly, his legs somewhat betray his exhibitionist stance by taking on a duelist pose. Like a fencer, he's using his right leg to offer balance and to allow him to lunge quickly if the need arises. But on that, it also implies an unsteadiness, perhaps even a hesitation if he's holding off lunging for a moment. Both could be implied, and both suggest that Sigvald might be remembering the last time he got a bit overconfident, and is quietly preparing himself should danger appear. And the other aspect is just how much space Sigvald takes up. Far from simply revealing his beautiful form, his cape, his horns and outstretched arms also allow him to present himself as far bigger than he actually is. In a sense, he could be seen to simply be puffing his plumage in an attempt to provoke and intimidate his foes. Although, given it's Slaanesh, maybe he's peacocking and looking for a mate. With that particular Chaos God, both suggestions perhaps come hand in hand. But on a serious note once again, Sigvald's raised stature, looking down on the enemy from on high, is also a well-known photographic approach for implying seniority and power, and coupled with his somewhat inflated pose, it could be that he's overemphasising himself visually to give him an edge that he's less confident about mentally. I should say at this point that none of these reflections are criticisms in the slightest. Sigvald is a superb model and I wouldn't change a single thing about him. I'm simply interpreting the different features with my own views to draw out a possible subtext, and it's these sorts of questions and viewpoints that make these models truly incredible in my eyes, and I encourage you to join me in the comments below in a moment to share your perspectives. But let's move on, because I want to talk about how this model conveys both the strengths and weaknesses of Slaanesh in a couple of ways. Firstly, Sigvald's auric armour, which is phenomenal phenomenally well sculpted here, presents something that we've seen on the likes of other models, Dante in 40k being a prime example. It doesn't apply evenly to all characters, but the general sense is that while this sort of armour clearly emphasises the physical prowess of the wearer, it also emphasises the artifice behind it. Sigvald gained the power to achieve his every wish by selling his soul to Belas Pul, a demon of Slaanesh, and so it's only Slaanesh's gifts that make him so incredibly strong. What is Sigvald without those gifts, we may ask? But perhaps even more subtly than that, you can see on the armour all of these ornate decorations that swirl about him and blend with the flowing of his hair and cape. On one level, this does draw out that sense of swiftness that applies to so much of the Slaanesh range. Sigvald almost comes across as streamlined and malleable as he flows through a battle, just as the ornamentation flows across him. But importantly, there is one part of him that is distinctly absent of that aesthetic, the blade itself. This blade, the Silver Slash, is Sigvald's iconic weapon, forged from a fragment of Slaanesh's own blade, and is said to move like quicksilver, striking its foes down in a flurry of lightning-quick blows. This might seem like an odd feature to focus on, but I want to draw your attention to how straight it is compared to the rest of the model. If you look at the Myrmidesh that accompanies Sigvald's reveal, you can see how a curved blade might have been more fitting in that sense, excluding of course that it's an iconic weapon from the days of Warhammer Fantasy. But that's not how it presents itself at this moment, and the contrast between the rigid blade and the rest of the model creates an interesting focal point for the model as a whole. My personal feelings are that it nicely illustrates how fickle Sigvald truly is, prone to changing as the tides of his narcissism ebb and flow, but Slaanesh's purpose, the lust for power and pleasure, is absolute, the one constant that unites all of these dark self-interested followers together. But we can glean so much more of Sigvald's inner character when we glance to the top of the model, and these prominent horns that jut from his head. Now, these are rather interesting even simply as references, because Sigvald was born with a horned birthmark at the back of his neck. But in regards to their meaning, I think Games Workshop's Phil Kelly nicely sums it up with his tweet, mentioning that it reveals the inner ugliness that sits beneath the beautiful veneer. Taking it a bit further, the horns suggest how inhuman Sigvald truly is, and as we see in multiple Slaanesh models such as the mask, that beautiful appearances can easily veil very dark impulses, a big motif for Slaanesh in 40k as well as Age of Sigmar. As Phil says, it's a masterfully balanced model, and you can understand why he's so quickly become a proxy for Fulgrim in 40k, who has also veiled his dark and depraved desires behind his obsession with perfection. But as with so many of these sorts of videos, I want to close by looking at the model's base because it does something rather interesting in and of itself. Back when Teclis was revealed, I talked about how the base presented the fallen elven civilization and how life was rising from it once again, figuratively and literally under the attention of Teclis. Here there's a similar tone. Sigvald stands over what appears to be a fallen statue of a demonette, a face for Slaanesh as much as any you could say. And as with Teclis, we can interpret that Sigvald sees himself as some sort of custodian for Slaanesh's ambition and purpose. That would explain why he specifically is seeking to unite its followers ahead of the apotheosis. But at the same time, I wonder if it also implies that Sigvald sees himself as a herald for some new age for Slaanesh, a phoenix rising from the ashes of what once was and proudly presenting the new figurehead of a reborn god and faction. That might be overreaching, but it suggests something that might also perhaps apply to Teclis' model that I didn't see before. Both see themselves as being the ones who are making what once was Slaanesh and elven culture into more than they were before. They're not just protecting them, they're ensuring that they realise their true potential. Again, without the lore that is sure to come in the other Broken Realms books and supplements, it's impossible to say. But given what we know of Sigvald so far, it's not too much of a leap to think that Slaanesh may now need him almost as much as he needs Slaanesh. So that's just a few of my personal thoughts on the new Sigvald the Magnificent model, and it really is magnificent. Before I record these videos, I do spend a lot of time looking over each and every part of the sculpt, and it's been nothing but a joy to do so here, and to see just how Games Workshop is continuing to lift the bar with their releases. But what do you think about this new Sigvald model, and what messages and connotations do you get from it? What about the new Myrmidesh and Symbolism models? Are you going to be picking those up? And what do you think these mean for future Slaanesh releases? Whatever your thoughts, let me know in the comments below, and thank you as always for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider liking it and subscribing to the channel, and I do hope you'll join me for the next one. But until then, do take care.